About 10 years ago, me and some friends took a serious interest in ghost hunting, or as they say now, paranormal investigating. We were young. I had been married for about a year, but all of my friends were single. My wife was committed to school and work. Therefore, she rarely went with us on our trips. We were obsessed with it, but we did plan some pretty elaborate trips all over the United States and Canada. Some trips were fruitful, others were a waste of gas and vacation time from work. One trip, which to this day ranks as our greatest adventure. My buddy Mark heard of an old house down in Virginia which was said to be haunted by the man who built the home back in the 1800s. A couple of people had questionable photographic evidence of orbs and light flashes that circled the front room, or parlor as they used to call it. Since the first owner, no one had ever lived there. The house was gigantic. It had 8 bedrooms, a huge kitchen and dining room, plus 3 parlors. The house never had any indoor plumbing or electricity. I would say that's why no one ever lived there after the guy who built it died. He had a large family, but after his death, they abandoned the property. Neighbors made many attempts to try to buy the land to increase their acreage, but family members would never part with the land. Apparently, the old man was buried on the property. His self-made fortune was still paying the property taxes. An unknown executor of the estate was making sure it never became delinquent. I also heard that his last words were that it was his house and his land. No one else can ever own it. Some might say his determination may be the reason for the amount of paranormal activities on the property. Many people claim they have had ghost sightings while visiting the property or trespassing, depending on who you ask. Either way, the property and the old farmhouse were famous. We assembled like soldiers. Some packed the gear, some went for food, while me and Mark plotted our course. In no time, we were headed to Virginia. It was a long ride, but once we pulled up on that mailbox with the address that was tattooed on all of our brains, it was like Christmas morning. The entrance was overgrown. The driveway was off of an old dirt road we had been following forever. We had not seen a house for about 4 miles. The mailbox was old. A mason must have built it a long time ago. It stood alone like a monument. It was old and deteriorating. Intricate brickwork blanketed the lower half. The upper looked to be sculpted cement. On top of it was a gargoyle, not the big creepy kind you see in movies perched up high on an old castle. No, this guy was about 16 inches tall, sitting like a cherry on top of a bowl of ice cream. Time had weathered him. An arm and foot were missing. We all got out to look around. You couldn't see the house. Trees completely camouflaged it. My research said the driveway was a 2-track that you had to travel for about a quarter of a mile to reach the house. After we all stretched a little, we piled into the van and headed for the house. We'd only gone a few hundred feet when the van came to an abrupt halt. The 2-track drive we started out on instantly became 2 deep ruts. Darkness was beginning to fall. You could still see, but things were getting shadowy. I turned on the headlights. The side-by-side ruts extended as far as we could see. "Now what?" I heard from behind me. "We push," someone else said. With that, we all climbed out and began pushing the van backward to free it from the ruts. Once it was back on solid ground, we decided if we stayed to the left, there may be enough room to make it the rest of the way to the house. Mark thought we should walk it for a ways, just to make sure we could make it. I quickly responded, "It's only a quarter mile. Pack up the gear and we'll sleep in the house, but we'll take some tents just in case." There was complete silence. "Okay, scaredy cats, we'll sleep in the tents." The air instantly filled with comments ranging from "I'm not scared, you are," and "I'll sleep in the old guy's bed." Tough guy talk that always changes to humble pie when you're right in front of what scares you. We loaded our packs and continued on foot. The further we got, the deeper the ruts got. We quickly agreed that the van wouldn't have made it. Once this far in, there would have been no telling if we would have been able to get the van back to the road. Along the inner and outer edges of what I'll now call trenches were sharpened engines. It had to be some large piece of farm equipment that had been back here for some reason. We walked and walked. Whoever said it was about a quarter mile was an idiot. Soon the trees began to canopy the driveway. It went from pretty dark to you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We all had flashlights and extra batteries. The flashlights made the area well lit, but the dense forest on either side of us made you feel extremely vulnerable. Almost like at any moment something could attack out of the tree line. I could only describe it as we were like buffet food under a warming light waiting to be taken. It was unsettling, extremely unsettling. We all pushed on. Somehow we went from walking in a group to more of a single file line. I was middle-ish in the line. With constant noises coming from the tree lines, I felt more comfortable in the middle. I just kept reminding myself these woods are home of all kinds of animals, and they're probably just wondering why 6 guys with lights are tromping through their house at 10 at night. But I still kept getting this feeling, you know, the one you get in your gut. For instance, you're at a party trying to be cool, and your dumbass buddy magically produces a Ouija board. Of all the people there, he announces to the room that he wants you to play with him. You know it's a bad idea, and you get that wrenching feeling in your gut that screams to you, don't do it. Yeah, that's the feeling I'm talking about. And as for my buddy and the Ouija board, that's a whole other story I will be writing. Let's just say that's when I became serious about investigating the paranormal. It was probably the uneven terrain making it harder to walk straight, but I felt like we had been walking for hours. Finally, someone up front yelled that we were there. Everyone picked up the pace. In a couple minutes, we were all standing in a large clearing. It was still dark, but not like the driveway. You could see the night sky and stars riddled across it. Even with the flashlights, it was hard to see past their glow. We all walked forward, sweeping our lights from side to side. There was no house. The enormous brick structure I had spent the last 2 weeks looking at in old photos was gone. We walked a little around where it used to be, but all that remained were piles of brick. The piles were scattered through the area. It was obvious the house had been knocked down. Its debris was being hauled away by large equipment. That explained the ruts on the driveway. Disappointment raced through us. None of us could believe it was gone. After we scanned the area a bit more, we decided to pitch the tents and call it a night. It wasn't long before the tents were up. A campfire seemed to soften the mood. Something about sitting around a campfire, it just makes you feel better and safe. We all sat like a tribe after a long day of hunting. We all laughed as we recalled the day's events. Suddenly, the fire was gone, like someone blew out a birthday candle. Immediately our senses heightened. Everyone scrambled to their feet and quickly backed away from the circle. How the hell did that just happen? I said. We all just stood there looking at each other in disbelief. I reached for my flashlight, but before I could turn it on, there were 4 other flashlights aimed at the burnt pile of logs. There wasn't so much as an amber left glowing. The smoke that normally bellows after you extinguish a fire wasn't there. Mark knelt down next to the logs. He reached out and placed his hand on the charred log that supported the bulk of the fire. He turned to me with a confused look and said, "It's cold." "What do you mean it's cold? A minute ago it was on fire. How the hell can it be cold?" I asked. He shook his head and repeated, "It's cold. Like this fire burned out a week ago." Then he brushed his hand through the ash at the base of the fire. "Even the ashes are cold." "You mean they're wet?" I said. "Nope. he said as he stood up with a huge smile. Bone dry. Gentlemen, I think we got a ghost. The rest of the gang cheered like we'd just scored in a football game. Mark was even doing a silly little victory dance, pointing and swinging his knees in and out. All right, I said, settle down. It's only a story unless we got proof. Then it's fact. Everyone leaped into action. We set up cameras, video, and motion sensors. After all, this was what we came to see. Once the camp was what we called open for business, we restarted the campfire and patiently waited. Minutes slowly drug into hours. I could see the guys were starting to shut down. All right, guys, I said, I think we should try to get some sleep. In case something happens, we might be better rested to react to it. I'll take first watch. With no argument, everyone climbed into their tents. In less than 3 minutes, all you could hear was the crackle of the fire and 5 snoring idiots. On the bright side, their untreated sleep apnea did help keep me awake. I stared at the fire. The mesmerizing glow put me into a peaceful sort of trance. I visualized the property 100 years ago. How primitive it must have been. The old man may have sat on an old chair next to a small fire just like I was doing, possibly in this very spot. I started to feel cold. I stood up to grab my jacket. I took 4 steps toward the tent. Instantly, I felt the heat of the summer night. I turned and stepped back toward the fire. It was cold. I felt the air for a breeze. The night was still. Yet, right next to the fire was cold. I grabbed my recorder and began filming. I used a digital thermometer to compare the 2 areas. There was a 33-degree difference. Just then, a motion detector set off one of the cameras. I pounded on the sides of the tents to wake up the guys. Without words, they all slowly crawled out of their tents. We stood together as a brilliant cascade of light swirled above the campfire. I have never seen the northern lights in person, only on TV, but it seemed to duplicate the effect, only on a smaller scale. It was amazing. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It began to widen and move toward the piles of brick where the house once stood. It swirled around above the foundation of the old house, and then it was gone. We stood in silence for a few seconds, and then the high fives began. Every one of us had our cameras rolling. We immediately began to check the footage. It was all there. We had successfully filmed one of the most amazing paranormal encounters to date. We waited out the rest of the night. All of us were too wound to sleep. I looked at my watch. The sun would be coming up in about a half an hour. Off in the distance, I could hear the sound of an engine running. It was coming from the direction of the road. We all turned our attention to the sound. Any ideas? I asked. No one responded. We just stared in the direction of the sound. I jumped when I heard the engine's RPMs increase, like it was struggling. The sound became louder as it crept toward our camp. In a few minutes, we could see headlights coming towards us up the driveway. It was a large tractor. It revved its engine again as it rolled toward our tents. We waved our arms frantically, yelling to the driver. It was like he couldn't see us, or he didn't care. The front tire stopped just as it touched Mark's tent. The engine shut off, and an older man climbed out. The guys instantly engaged. Are you crazy? What the hell's wrong with you? You could have killed us. I told the guys to let the man speak. He spit something on the ground. By the bulge in his lip, I guessed it was chewing tobacco. He said we were trespassing. He knew we were back here when he saw our van by the road. I assured him we weren't hurting anything and we were sorry. He paused and spit again, and then he asked if we were ghost people. I nodded and told him yes, we take an interest in ghosts. He paused again as he looked me in the eyes. Then he said the family that owned the property had owned it for over 100 years. He said he was paid to tear down the house and haul away the debris. I asked him why he would want to tear down such a magnificent structure. He shook his head in disgust and said, because of people like you. You come out here uninvited like it's yours. He was right. I apologized again. I assured him as quick as we could pack up, we would be gone. A calmness seemed to roll over the old guy. He said we seemed like good young men. Then he said, "You know, I don't claim to know a lot, but I like to think that the old man's ghost was just staying in his house until he could figure out what you're supposed to do when you're dead." Then he laughed and said he hopes no one tears down his house while he's waiting to get into heaven. He turned his back and climbed back into the large tractor. We packed up our stuff and hiked back to the van. The whole time I thought about the old man's words. I felt terrible that I had added to the reason the old farmhouse was demolished, and the swirling entity over the fire. I believe now that was the old man's ghost showing us he's lost and now his home is gone. Once we were back home, we contacted DPI, the Department of Paranormal Investigations. We sent them our photos and video. It was logged as evidence of factual paranormal activity. To this day, the footage has not been disapproved. That was the last ghost hunt we went on. The old guy on the tractor's words still haunt me. I've always believed that ghosts or spirits may be trying to talk to us, maybe even trying to teach us. They used to be simple and confused people just like us. Maybe the knowledge they've learned in the afterlife is what they're trying to tell us. Just like a teacher, they demand our attention. We are all just going through the stages of life. You're born, you live, and you die. But who says those are the only stages? If there is a stage after death, well, I think it's worth learning about. As a child, you are taught about being an adult, and as an adult, you learn death is inevitable. I guess that being said, how do we know it stops there? Maybe spirits are trying to teach us about the next stage. Unfortunately, most people are too scared to listen.